for take two. I think we do want to. We want to record this for all posterity.
I feel like I'm very close to the camera. I should sit
All
back.
right. Good evening and welcome to the latest installment of the Cast Your Vote Virtual Town Hall Series, brought to you by the Brooklyn, Long Island Alumni Chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. As with previous installments, my name is Kevin Boston Hill, and I will be your moderator for tonight's conversation. Why is voter registration important to our democracy? Joining me to provide some valuable insight to explore this question are from Brooklyn, New York, Kevin S. Parker, New York State Senator, 21st District. From Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Kenya Peoples, State Director, Eastern Pennsylvania of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. From Fayetteville, North Carolina, Dr. Kimberly Hardy, Assistant Professor at Fayetteville State University and member of Sigma Gamma Rho Sorority Incorporated. And all the way from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Robert Q. Johnson, State Director, Western Pennsylvania of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity Incorporated. And of course, we invite you, the viewing audience, to take part in this conversation as well. Whether you are viewing on Facebook or YouTube, please submit your questions and comments for our panel. Now, before we get started, I would like to wish the men of Iota Phi Theta Fraternity a very happy Founders Day, and that you are now 59 years and counting. Again, congratulations, gentlemen.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we're going to go ahead and jump right into this conversation because I think, especially in this time frame that we're dealing with, it's a very important one. And so what I want to address to all of you, I'm going to throw the question out there, and any of you can answer the question. We can even have some cross conversation going, but I want you to think about this question first. As people have experienced with the political process, what does voter rights mean to you in terms of serving our communities?
Oh, can I go?
Oh,
Dr. Hardy?
sure.
Please,
Okay.
ladies first.
So, I love that. Thank you, gentlemen. So first of all, I have to take a point of personal privilege, if you don't mind, Brother Boston Hill. As of August 1st of this year, I have been tenured and promoted at Fayetteville State University. And so I am now an associate professor in our School of Social Work. So I'm very proud of that accomplishment. I want to
Congratulations.
My apologies. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. It's a recent development, so that's why you wouldn't have known it, but I appreciate it. So what do voter rights mean in the context of us serving our communities? This is super important. This means a lot of different things, right? So first, it means that folks have access to the ballot box. That access is sometimes quite limited for reasons that are more or less obvious. More obvious is in states where they have lost their right to vote because they have been convicted of a felony. That is such a huge issue right now, and we really need to make sure that we work on rescinding that policy in states where they have done that. So that has to stop. So that's not access to the ballot box. But then there's also access to the ballot box in a geographic sense. Like, so when I was running for office here in North Carolina for the state legislature, we had to fight every single election cycle for this one particular early voting location to stay an early voting location. Even though the turnout wasn't great at that one all the time, which is what they were using to justify trying to close it. One of the big issues is that it served in a sort of lower income community, lower to middle income, but also a community of older African Americans who didn't necessarily have access to personal transport to get to another voting location. So keeping spaces open, keeping them open longer, keeping them open on weekends, that's what a voter's right is, to cast their ballot uninterrupted by any sort of
Oh, I think we froze a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think she did. But
That's okay.
I'll hop in there if
Well,
you gentlemen don't mind.
Sure,
Go
please
ahead,
do.
Kim.
We'll come back to you, Dr. Hardy. You froze up on us a little bit there.
You go with Mr. Johnson. That's fine.
Well, what I was going to say is, in conjunction with to what she was saying, is that I believe, as we've seen in previous elections, to me, that our vote counts and our vote carries weight. And whereas previously, our votes really didn't matter. That we're not going to shift anything. But I think these previous elections, it's been seen that, if you get our community to vote, we will shift, we make the difference. So I think that these laws and things are now coming about so that our voices won't be heard. So we won't make the shift. We will not be able to count, as against before. But I think that it is important to me that we, in conjunction with Dr. Harvey said, that we have to, ensure that these things, that we keep our voice, that we continue to count and continue to show that, what the Black and brown people have to say makes a difference and shifts in what goes on in this country.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's basically making our voice be heard again. So often we go back to the 1960s when voter registration was a big thing, and it seems like we're going right back to that time frame again, where they tried to block us from voting as individuals and as Black and brown people. So voting registration is very powerful, and it basically needs our voice to be heard. It allows democracy accountability. It provides a method of different tools so that we can vote on differences and conflicts that we are facing throughout the day, throughout the year, throughout the United States. So voting registration is very important, but I think people don't realize how important it is today versus going back to the 1960s. There was important then, but now it's really important now because they're going back and trying to stop us from voting again. They putting up blockers. They saying that you can't vote towards a certain time frame. I have an incident where around here, I live in Southwest Philadelphia, where some people were standing in line for last year. Some people were standing in line and they couldn't vote, and I had to call the area councilman and have them say, they were in line at a certain time. So it's very important that we understand our rights and we understand why we're voting and what are we voting for.
Senator Parker? You're muted, sir.
I knew that. I was just testing. Good job, Captain. So let me just jump in here on a more, I think, fundamental issue. And the question is, why is voting important? And we should acknowledge that Tuesday of this week was actually National Voter Registration Week, right? And so we're right now trying to encourage people to register to vote because we're on the cusp of our national elections on November 8th, right? On Tuesday, November 8th. And so the reality is that the government, right, controls almost every single aspect of our lives. Even if you want to be in business, right? If you want to be in business, first thing you have to do is get a certificate of incorporation from your state's Secretary of State, right? Then you have to file taxes, right, with the federal government, right? If you have a brick and mortar business, you have to deal with the buildings department to make sure. If you're selling food, you have to deal with the health department, right? And so there's almost no endeavor. You're running a nonprofit organization, same thing. You always need to interact. And so there's almost no endeavor that we're engaged in which the government is not involved in. And if you're a taxpayer, anybody here on this call not a taxpayer, just raise your hand. No, I'm just joking. But if you're a taxpayer, that means if you're not voting, that means that you're not essentially making sure that the money that you're paying into the system is used in a way that comports with your values and your principles and the needs of you and your community, right? And so that's why it's really important for our community. And so we're talking about access to education, healthcare, housing, public protection, transportation. All those things are decided by elected officials, right? And in addition, things like criminal justice policy, right? In many places, if you're in a smaller jurisdiction, you might even elect your sheriff, right? If you go back and look at what was happening in kind of like East St. Louis, Their problem wasn't really a criminal justice problem. Their problem was an electoral problem, right? And so what we've learned from the murder of George Floyd is that we have to be involved in both the policy making, but also the policy makers, right? And make sure that we're putting people in office who share our values and going to make sure our will be done.
And Dr. Hardy, I would like you to finish your question, your answer, your response. I think you left off where you were talking about one of the polling sites that was closing down or about to be closed because of the low turnout.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted to say, and I apologize, my connection's a little cattywampus, but they were saying that it was the low turnout that was the impetus for closing it down, but really it's in an African-American community, lower to middle income with a large older population. And so we always have to fight the county board of elections, and it ends up going to the state board of elections every time to ensure that that location gets to stay open. And so access to the ballot also means having a space where it's convenient for you to go and vote, like so many other communities that we have. But I will say that there is something to be said for voter registration. I think that is outstanding, but at some point, I hope we get to talk about how much more important voter engagement and voter turnout are, because voter education and getting them to understand the issues and their ability to make that kind of change is hugely important. And we have a huge turnout issue, so that registration is less the problem anymore. It's getting the ones who are registered to actually come to the ballot. So
because we can get we can get them to register, but it's actually getting them to go to the ballot and to actually press that button to vote for those people who they should elect into office.
Exactly.
So that's the education part too.
But I think you're both right about that. But as somebody who runs elections, you need to do both, right? And and again, Dr. Hardy, you're right. We don't really have in most of our communities, particularly the Northeast urban centers, you don't have a problem with registration. You have enough people registered. However, doing registration drives actually helps raise the awareness of people that elections are coming up, right? And so doing big mobilizations around registering people is part of that larger push to get, as we say, souls to the polls on election day. So you're right in terms of where the emphasis needs to be, but this is part of it. And so you have to continue to do it because it becomes part of the mechanism in which we get people to the polls.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't mobilize people who aren't registered, right? So if we want to go souls to the polls, we got to get them registered. It's a yes and.
No, but that's not the point I'm making. I'm not saying, and I'm agreeing with you actually 100%. If we didn't register one more person, we would be fine, right? In terms of the numbers of people we have registered. But I'm saying the actual activity of, let's say, standing in churches saying that we need to hand out registration cards, the actual activity of Sigma Gamma Rho working events to make sure that people are registered, when people see that, it reminds current voters that they need to make it to the polls.
Absolutely.
And that's what I'm saying that we need to continue to do.
Okay,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, because we know that, and as you pointed out, Senator Parker, that this past Tuesday was voter registration day. So now I'm thinking, if we wanted to really mobilize and we want to educate and so forth, why not expand that out? Why not have a voter registration month as opposed to a day? I mean, remember there was a time we had Black History Week, and now it's Black History Month, right? So why can't we do something similar to, instead of voter registration day, we focus on voter registration month? So it still does what you were referring to. You're really reminding the general population that, it's time for us to go vote. But you're also galvanizing, you're spending more time as opposed to focusing on that one, all your energies on that one day.
Let's do it.
Yeah, I don't think there's
I'm down for that. We should do it
right now.
I mean, one day, because one day mobilizing people for one day. I mean, we're doing it from January to September, but then you have that one day in September where we got to get all these people out here to go ahead and register for that one day. It's like, okay, who's going to do it? So having a whole month, we get a whole board of people doing it.
Well, and what I'll add to is that the education, and a lot of the people that I've talked to don't necessarily understand the issues It's there. I think education is a big important part too. What issues are we dealing with? Because a lot of people I've run across is, I vote this way because grandma votes this way, mom and dad votes this way, and you understanding the issue? So I think that mobilizing them, but helping an education and understanding of what those issues are and how those issues affect you, to what Senator you were saying as well, is that do you understand how your vote impacts your community? Do you understand that your silence is what's causing these other things? So I think that's a part that also needs to be incorporated into, if we're going to do a month or what have you. I think that needs to be incorporated so that people understand not only we're mobilizing you to do it, not just we want you to go do something, but this is exactly how it affects you. This is the why. This is the reason that we're saying do it. And this is how, you know what I mean? A lot of people don't understand until it touches home. So the education is, this is how it touches home to you or to your community.
And see, this is exactly what I mean when I say voter engagement, because it's fine to have a national voter registration day. That's fine. We can do it for a month. We can get the D9 to take a month and we do it in that whatever, right? But if they don't get why they have to vote, then they're going to be less inclined to do so. And so for one of the things that I've done here in North Carolina so far is I was president of my Democratic Women chapter for Cumberland County. And so I said, we're going to start doing lit drops. Because you have to talk to the voters all the time, not just during election cycles. They wait for that. They're like, oh, it must be time to vote again because y'all don't ever talk to me no other time. You only in my church when it's time for me to get your vote. We're only doing these drives. So I think that has to be all the time. So what me and my board members and the members of the organization did was we took one issue. Now, as a researcher, we have by convention a standard that you don't write any research document for the research subjects past the 6th to 8th grade level. It doesn't matter who you're doing it to, because you never know what somebody's level of accessibility is in terms of understanding what you're writing. So we took one issue, we wrote it in plain English, and we said, we made 3 points. This is what the issue is in plain English. This is why it matters to you right now today. And the last part was, and this is what you can do to change it. And we did lit drops every month, January, February, March, and April. And I believe they kept it going, but I was on the ballot, so I couldn't do it anymore. But we have to let them know what's at stake, because often I have found that people really don't understand what their state legislators really have the power to control. And so they think it's these big fancy laws, and it is, but I'm part of the UNC system. Our General Assembly is the one that appoints the members of the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors is the most powerful group of people in this state because they control the whole of the UNC system. They make decisions about things that affect us that they don't even know anything about. It's so much more than people really understand, but it's a lot to take in when you're the average person who's just trying to live your life day to day. So if you do things on a consistent basis and in ways that are bite size so that people can take them in and get it, then by the time it's election season, they've been engaged, they understand the issues, they have a relationship with you, and when you ask them to go out and vote, I think they'd be much more likely to do so. That's what the New Georgia Project did, and we started the New North Carolina Project. I'm on their board as well. I'm very busy and tired, but we do the same thing here, where we're trying to get engaged with these communities so they understand what's at stake and why each of these different races, particularly the judges' races, matters so much.
Senator Parker, you're on mute again, but I'm glad you did jump in because we do want to hear from you on that particular case.
Yeah. So so one of the things that I'm totally agreeing with Dr. Hardy on is this notion of us treating elections as processes and not events. Right. If we continue to use voting and think about elections as events as opposed to processes, we're going to always lose. But let me also say that I think that, especially on the lower levels, when we talk about municipal elections and state elections, which, by the way, I will argue every single day and twice on Sundays as a political science professor, is more important than the federal election because of federalism and the way that our U.S. government is set up. Most of the things that people are concerned about, again, major issues, education, healthcare, housing, public protection, transportation, are almost all decided uniquely on the state level, far more than the federal level. But, being in Congress and talking about the president is sexy, but that's not really where most of the decisions that people care about day to day are being decided, right? And when you look at the local level, those elections are more beauty contests around candidates than they are referendums on issues, right? And so we really need to work with candidates to make sure that they're getting out early enough, because oftentimes people are getting to the polls and it's a lesser of two evils. But it's only a lesser of two evils because during the selection process for candidates, we weren't engaged in it. And so we never picked, even if it's a Black candidate, we didn't pick that Black candidate, right? Most of the time we're left to scoundrels because communities aren't involved in saying, who do we want to be our new state rep or our state senator or our city council person or our mayor or our district attorney, right? And so we have to be engaged a lot more with those folks on the ground as they choose their candidates, as opposed to just talking about policy.
And I see you're getting a little interrupted in your space over there. So let me turn the question around just a little bit here, because we know that this year, and I'm sure any of you can respond to this, and Senator Parker, Dr. Hardy, because of your affiliations, I know you experienced this next question kind of personally, hits home, but this year, pretty much every state redrew their congressional district lines. So what is the potential impact?
No, Kevin, let me interrupt you. The entire country redistricted every single proportion seat in the country. So right. Everything from the state legislature, not just congressional lines, state senate, state rep, city council, county legislators, everybody drew their lines, the entire country.
So my question therefore is, what's the potential impact of redistricting, especially to people of color?
Oh, I have got to jump in on this. Okay, so North Carolina is famous for gerrymandering, right? And we can call it redistricting, but we all know what it is, right? North Carolina is a swing state, okay? Until the Georgia folks did what they did this last cycle, there was no path to the White House that did not include winning the state of North Carolina. It was the writing was on the wall. We were not going to win North Carolina. Donald Trump came here in 2020 over and over again, and now not just North Carolina, but to my district. He came to Cumberland County many times and sent his surrogates and stuff many times. When this cycle happened, because they'd already redrawn the lines then, they did it again this time, and now a district that was mine, it was super, super small, took up literally the whole eastern part of Cumberland County now. And it's bigger than any of the other counties. Like, you put all the other ones combined and it's still bigger than that. What they took and put in there, though, were the very rural and thus more red conservative communities, because they took the seat from us in 2020 and they want to make sure that they can hold it. And so what you have is people who are rather disparate in the issues and the views in where they are on east, what we call east of the river, versus down in Fayetteville and Linden. And they made the voices of Fayetteville residents is essentially pointless, because numerically these other spaces have more votes now. And so even though the issues are not really the same, the communities have never been combined in a district like that before, it has taken the voices of the people who were represented most by that district before, and it's kind of watered down their vote. And then you get people who don't know what district they're voting in anymore. I mean, we had to push our primary election back by months while the courts finished going through our redistricting situation to make sure that we didn't even know, like, what district are we running in, because the lines were so ridiculous for so long. So I think one of the things it does is it dilutes the votes of the people who were in that district before they drew in the other ones, or it draws people out of those districts in these very bizarrely shaped ways, so that it's very clear they're trying to draw in a particular constituency.
Okay. Well, my question is, and forgive my ignorance for knowing, but who decides how the lines are drawn?
The state legislature. So essentially what happens is every 10 years we have the census. And based on the census, the following year, there's redistricting. And every state legislature, and then it's approved by the governor, goes through a process of drawing out lines on every level. So they start with congressional lines, and then they do state legislative lines, state senate lines, city council, and county legislative lines as well. Usually the county legislature, usually in most states, city council and county legislators are a different year. And usually state legislatures actually run on the same year as redistricting happens. In most states, some places it's different, but most states is that way. And then so you have a commission, you have a professional commission, but essentially the lines are submitted by the state legislature. And that's why you hear Dr. Hardy talking about this. The process is actually called redistricting. Now, a perversion of that is gerrymandering, in which communities, oftentimes Black and Latino communities, are cracked and stacked. Sometimes they pack us into one district to dilute our votes, or they crack us, they'll separate us, and you'll take a place that should be contiguous, and you'll draw lines through it in order to dilute the votes of that community, in order to give another community more power. And so that's part of why having control of a state legislature is actually critical, not just for the year-to-year decisions that the legislature makes in terms of laws, the budget, appointments, but also because every 10 years they get a chance to draw the lines, and the parties that are in power essentially control the process. And then so the Democrats, like in my state right now, the Democrats are in control, but for 70 years in the state Senate, it was the Republicans. And so the Republicans were drawing our lines. We were able to win despite that, just because of population shifts, thank God. But otherwise, we would still be in the same dynamic. And certainly North Carolina has a challenge in terms of Democrats, being able to win elections with gerrymandered districts, because they'll find a district and they'll, like I said, crack our districts or pack our districts in order to dilute our political power.
With redistricting, with gerrymandering, ain't that something where you have voters go to the voter registry, go to voting office ballot, and they can't no longer vote there, and they got to go somewhere else?
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what happens, but it's not really done. I mean, some people think that it's done simply to inconvenience voters and make it hard for people to vote. That's just an unintended consequence.
Okay.
Yeah. What they're really trying to do is balance districts out based on numbers, right? So in the state Senate in New York, our districts are 310,000 people. And so what they want to do every 10 years based on the census is to make sure that population shifts have been accounted for within the context of the representation of your community. That they also sometimes either eliminate districts or they increase districts. So the state Senate, for instance, we added a new state Senate seat this year. And so in the next legislature, we're going to go from 63 members to now 64 members, because the population of the state of New York increased.
Okay.
When you have, now again, North Carolina is trifling, so we gerrymander here. Like we redistrict in the sense that yes, it's the census data, but we did it these last two election cycles, in 20 and again in 22. And ours were, we tried multiple times to get independent outside folks to come and redraw the lines, because we did not trust that the legislators would do what they were supposed to do. And then it wound up having to go to the judges in order to get finalized. And so if it goes the way it's supposed to go, then yes, Brother Parker's thing makes all the sense in the world. And that's exactly how it should go. North Carolina is just so ridiculous that we just do this wrong all the time. We've been getting in trouble for gerrymandering even at the federal level for decades, because when you don't have anything of merit to run your campaign on, then you do things like cheat. And so that's a real challenge. But see, this is another reason why, just like Brother Parker said, why it's so important that you put the right people in office, why we have to educate folks about things like, well, I don't like how they gerrymander. Well, the people in office at the time that we do the redistricting are going to be the ones to make those decisions. So you have to put people in there who are going to make those decisions short-term and long-term. And it's another reason why we also have to continue to push census completion in communities. Usually the underrepresented voting spaces are also underrepresented in the census spaces.
That's right.
So we need to make sure we do those things together.
I was going to ask you about the census, but that like ties in with the census. That's why it's important that we fill out that census, because that ties into everything in prediction, all that. So
I mean, it sounds like we need to really take this all the way back to, because we talk about education, voter education. We might need to go back into our school system and reintroduce civics, because those are everything you're talking about: census, voting, districting, and all that. That was all part of basic civics class. And I think we probably need to go back to doing something like that. And although I know we can't mandate curriculum, but why not?
You build the right superintendent and the right secretary of education into office, right? These are all these things are important.
Yeah, but no. But Kevin, you can mandate curriculum. That's exactly what happens, right? And most states, again, the chancellor for the state Department of Education is actually typically chosen either by the governor and then confirmed by the state Senate, or they're actually voted on, like in the state of New York, by the actual legislature, right? And so you can, but you also can change the law to directly to just make civics class. We have, and a lot of states have bills that would make that law. Very few states have done it, but you're 100% right that civics education is really critical and something that we really need to look into and push across the country.
Well, I will say in my home state of Texas, we're familiar with the term of whitewashing, and they have, backdoor, whereas they have now reduced Black History Month to a peanut in a dream. Whereas prior to, you learn about the many things and accomplishments of brown people throughout that, but they've, slowly different laws and that, to your point, Senator, have begun the whitewashing that you've now reduced what's taught about the, the contributions of Black and brown people in America, specifically in the state.
And see, this is why it's not just important for your, state superintendent, your secretary of education, your board of education, whatever that's called across your different states, and how those people get in office, but school board elections. I think a lot of time we spend so much of our energy focusing on the national races and the state races, and to a somewhat lesser extent the municipals, but usually only like city council and county commission. But there are so many other seats that people need to run for, and so many other areas. And so I teach a policy class on the master's level with the social work students, and we literally start with how a bill becomes a law. Like we literally, because, this is not the kind of thing that people are paying attention to on an average daily basis. And so you have to remind people that this is what the process should look like. If it were linear, it is not. And so then we talk about all the ways in which that video was great for kids, but it isn't really the way the process works. But we also talk about what is your issue that you have the most problem with, and then at what level of elected do you take that issue to them, right? So not every issue is something that goes to like the state Senate. Some stuff goes to the school board. Some stuff goes to city council. These things, it's important for everybody to know all the different ways in which they can make a contribution, either by running for these various seats or ensuring that they vote for these people and who are running in those seats, and what they can control. I mean, in Cumberland County, when we were on our COVID year and a half, almost 2 years, the K-12 school system, our school board, they were like, oh, the kids should go back because it's largely a conservative Republican-based board. And so they were like, oh, they should absolutely go back and you can't mask our kids. But everybody else was like, no, we want to do what's right. The governor has said that we should stay home. We can do this online. And so there was just this huge ideological battle, but these people are elected to this space. And so if you had a problem with the way that, and eventually they did relent and we left the kids at home long enough for them to stay safe. But, if you have a problem with the way that process works, then you either need to run for school board, or you need to make sure that you're voting for the right person for school board.
Mm-hmm.
And,
I found out Dr. Hardy's playing Schoolhouse Rock for her grad students up in there.
Whatever works, man.
I think sometimes that piece that you talk about, Doctor, was that, we don't understand the importance of voting in those types of elections. I'm going to be blank transparent with you. I didn't know how important it was in voting in those types of elections because I was not educated. I was just educated in voting for the quote unquote big types of elections, the mayor and the state, and also the president. There were only the types of elections that were mattered in my time and that was toward that you should vote in. So it goes back to educating people on what's important and where we should start these voting registrations and voting for democracy and changing things, bringing that to the people and letting them know that it's very important to vote for your mayor, your city councilwoman, your city councilman, your state representative, your city council person. So we have to educate more people in that area as well.
Mm-hmm.
But see, I don't think that voting is where you start. I think participation is where you start. In other words, where I tell people is to get involved again in the process. I want to get away from this notion of thinking about politics as an event as opposed to a process, right?
Okay.
So everybody who's listening to me right now, if you live in an apartment building, join your tenant association.
Mm-hmm.
If you live in a house, join your block association or your civic association or your homeowners association, right? If you belong to a church, get on the steward board. Be involved in one of the ministries, right? If there's a local NAACP or Urban League chapter, join that. If you belong to a sorority or a Masonic organization, get involved in those organizations. In other words, those become the building blocks to democracy. And the more that people are engaged in their community, then they're more likely to vote because they'll understand, because of their participation, why they should be voting. And then they also can then see good potential candidates like Kimberly Hardy and saying, you know what, this is a smart sister who's clearly dedicated to our community, who really wants to help and has a lot to contribute. Let's get behind her. Let's raise money for her. Let's knock on doors for her. Let's make sure that she has all the resources that she needs and the outreach that she needs in order to win an election. And that's how you get good people in office, right? It's not just about, people going out to vote, but actually electing good people. And you actually elect good people when you're involved in the process and the candidates that you want to work for.
That's true. And can I say that you touched on a thing that is so critical, Brother Parker. Please, y'all, I say this, I think the brothers of Brooklyn, Long Island have me on enough of these chats. If you go back and look at the videos, you'll see, I've said this numerous times, please donate to campaigns. The money does not come to us. I am not out buying fancy dresses with your donations, right? Please donate to campaigns and volunteer on them, knock doors and canvass for them, make phone calls and do phone banks for them, do lit drops for them. The candidate cannot do this by themselves. They have their own team. They have a campaign manager, a comms person. But if you are good and savvy at social media, I had an intern that taught me how to post a video on Instagram because I hated Instagram and now I love Instagram, right? So if you have a skill set, your candidate needs it. If you can make a $10, $15 a month contribution, your candidate needs it. And everybody thinks that you need to make like these humongous donations. Like I used to ask friends, during call time.
Yeah, she
Froze up again.
Yeah.
Let me pick it back.
Yeah, please pick up on that.
Just a quick note. She's 100% right.
Did I freeze again?
You did. Go ahead, Doc.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Did I freeze again?
No,
Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
Because you're talking bad about North Carolina.
That's about the Republicans. Like, shut her down. But like seriously, I promise you that your donation to a campaign is a revolutionary act. I mean, you can go out and you can vote for us, but if we can't get our message out there because we can't afford a radio ad or we can't afford that mail piece that you look at for 2 seconds and then throw in your recycling bin, and we know that you do it, but we have to do it anyway. And so if you can volunteer, if you can donate, if you can, and then go and vote, that's the trifecta right there, right? That's how you help get those good people you've identified who understand your community and issues into office. That is critical. So, Brother Parker, I have to say something about it.
Yes. So let me just make the caveat that you can do it. You can do it as a group, but you can't do it as an organization.
Right.
Yes. 501c3 organizations cannot make political endorsements, but you can do it as a group.
The C4s can.
Right.
Yes.
C4s can, but most of the D9 organizations
Or
don't have
C3s, yeah.
C4, right? And so
Yeah.
just FYI, I just want to know, you could do it as a group. You could do it as a group, but you can do it like in Brooklyn. If Brooklyn Long Island Kappas wanted to support Hakeem Jeffries, who's a Kappa, you can all go out and do it. But
Not under the
chapter,
name.
but the chapter can't do an endorsement. So I just want to make sure that we keep everybody straight,
Yeah,
and that's
nobody
really the case,
gets in trouble.
right?
All right, well,
I don't want.
I in trouble.
No, that because they will. But I will pose the opposite question to you, Senator, in that whereas when the participation on the other end, whereas Dr. Hardy spoke about, I just see you where those in office makes it an event because the participation is not there per se until you're in that election cycle. So what is your feeling on, I guess you say, those who don't necessarily participate until they're in that cycle? Because I think participation needs to be on both ends. You know what I mean?
I think I totally agree. I try to be an elected. I'm the state senator in Brooklyn. I represent the 21st district, Flatbush and East Flatbush, Midwood, Dittman's Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. I'm the majority whip in the New York State Senate, and I'm the chairman of the Energy and Telecommunications Committee. I've been in office in January, it'll be 20 years, right? I just won my 11th election, right? And so, I've been doing this a little while, and I try to be, then I think most of my colleagues, call ourselves going to events throughout the year. And so, we can have big arguments about whether elected officials just show up at election time or not. Some do, but many don't. But the reality is, ultimately, it's voters who are getting the short end of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
And so voters have to have more agency and more accountability for themselves in terms of and that's the point I'm making, of not just, going to vote, but saying, is this scallywag doing what I need him to do? Right? And if the people in my district don't think that I'm showing up other than election time, then they should find somebody to replace me. But you're not going to find somebody to replace me by just showing up on election day and just voting for somebody who's not me, because half the time there's nobody running against me. Right? It's really about going out and finding a good candidate like Kimberly Hardy and saying, let's elevate this sister so that she can increase her service to our community, right? And that's why I'm suggesting that people participate in the process as opposed to just thinking about educating people for voting. If you get people involved in community outcomes, then they're more likely to say, okay, election time is coming up. Oh, I know this person, or I don't know this person, and I'm not messing with them. All right. And we're going to support this particular person because we know that they've been around and they've been contributing. They've come to our block association, or they've seen them at the church or whatever.
Again, don't misunderstand. I'm not taking the onus from the public because if you want somebody to represent you and that person fails to do so, then you need to replace that person. I'm not taking the onus on that. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, the opposite direction of it. That's all.
Yeah. And by the way, the other piece too is that you have a lot of voters, as you heard Ken indicate and give his little testimony, right, about this, is that a lot of times voters only vote in like the general election, right? And they won't vote in primaries. And let me say, in a place like New York, everything in my election is the primary, right? Like with all due respect, Barack Obama can't beat me on the Republican line in my district, right? And there's not enough Republicans. And so if you're not voting in the Democratic primary in New York City, then you might as well not vote, because the general election is essentially a rubber stamp of what happens in the primary. And so understanding those dynamics, and places like Philly and Pittsburgh, similar, right? North Carolina is a little bit different depending on where you are. And so you have to understand those dynamics and which elections are really important and where decisions are actually being made at.
So let me ask you this question, because we know that every year people get this attitude that, well, why should I bother voting? Because my vote doesn't matter and nothing's going to change, especially when you start talking about redrawing lines and redistricting and so forth. So what do you tell people who have those types of attitudes?
If I'll go first on this one, if and I'm a little bit more brash of a person, well, if you shut up when you don't get represented, when things don't go your way, laws are passed to, let's say, support one way or the other, and we all know who I'm talking about, then shut up about it. If you're not going to go do something and make your voice be heard, even if you're the only one with the megaphone, so be it. Then you're allowing your voice to be heard. But if you're going to sit back and do nothing and say nothing, then I don't want to hear your complaints.
He said that. What I try to say, so he's brash. I try to be more of an educator about mine. But I like to give this example that a couple of years ago in the state of Virginia, they had a state legislative race, Democrat, Republican. It came down to one vote. And so the policy, the law for Virginia is if it's within one vote, the decision is made by a coin toss. That's madness, right? Now, fortunately, we got heads, right, or whatever. And so the Democrats
check the coin, check the coin when they flip. Check the coin.
That's one terrible reason why people say that it doesn't matter. Here's another one, more contemporary, and that touches directly into my personal experience. In 2020, we had a wonderful slate of Democrats. And within that slate, an amazing slate of Black women running all across the state, up and down the ballot. On the ballot was Pat Timmons Goodson, who was the first Black woman to sit on the North Carolina State Supreme Court. On that ballot was Cheri Beasley, who was appointed to be the first Black woman to serve as Chief Justice of the North Carolina State Supreme Court. On that ballot was Yvonne Holley, who is a proud Delta woman and Howard alumna and was in the State House for many years and was running to be our first Black woman lieutenant governor. On that ballot was me for the State House, and my friend Dr. Amy Steele and Dr. Frances Jackson and Judge Laura Cubbage and like all these amazing sisters, right? We would get on the call every Thursday night, anybody who could come, we'd exchange ideas, we'd vent, because Brother Parker can understand this. There are some things about being a candidate that just only candidates.
I know, you always have right when she's getting really good.
Right when she's getting
as a candidate.
They won't let you great.
We would have 4 people per county, okay? We have 100 counties in North Carolina. If 4 people in each county would have voted, 4 more, Cheri Beasley would still be our Chief Justice for the state Supreme Court, but she lost by 400 votes. If we'd have had a 1% increase in Democratic voter turnout, we would have had over 54,000 additional Democratic votes, and every single one of these sisters would have won. Unfortunately, one of us won and the other 17 did not. That's incredibly important. And so we won by very small margins, 1,000 votes here, 400 votes there. So when people say that their vote doesn't matter, I'd like to give them very clear examples of ways in which it really would have mattered if just 4 more people per county would have come out and voted that day. So, I mean, it does matter. Try us and see. Believe us when we tell you that it does, because it really, really does.
In New York, I think we have the opposite situation. When I first got elected, 20 years ago, we used to talk about 3 men in the room making all the decisions in the state. It was the president of the Senate, the speaker of the assembly, and the governor, all with 3 white men, right? 20 years later, the 3 men in the room are 2 women and 2 African Americans, right? Like literally both the head of the Senate and the head of the state assembly are African American, and we have a female governor. We, everybody, yesterday saw Tish James, first African American woman, first African American to be Attorney General, who's taken down, who's going after your boy Trump. And so, again, that's the kind of differences that it makes. In the city of New York, we have Eric Adams, African American mayor. Our second in line is the public advocate Jumaane Williams. Both are good friends and African American. The speaker of the city council is African American, and Dr. Hardy, you'll be proud of this, that the state of New York boasts the largest contingent of African American female legislators in the entire country, right? And so, people talk about Wakanda. We have Wakanda here in New York State, and it's made a difference in terms of the policy outcomes that you're seeing in terms of our ability to take care of our communities. And so that's really important. Unfortunately, I have to jump off, but I did want to, again, remind everybody, one, thank you for including me in this incredible conversation with this very distinguished panel. And I just wanted to remind everybody, again, to think about politics as a process and not just an event. And look at where you stand and get involved with the process, whether that's a school board or a PTA, a block association, a tenant association, your NAACP, your fraternity, sorority, wherever it is that you're standing in that place, get involved, and it's that involvement in the process that will give us better outcomes in terms of elections and participating in elections. So again, thank you all for including me. Thank you, brothers of Brooklyn, Long Island alumni of Kappa Alpha Psi. Really appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to shift gears once again a little bit, because we talked about school board elections. We talked about changing school curriculum and so forth. So those are things that kind of impact our youth. So I want to get into now, how can our youth, those who are, say, 18 to 22, really get involved in this process? Again, not just with the voting aspect of it and the education aspect, but perhaps running for office themselves.
Yes. Okay. I want to jump in. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, brother Peoples. No, I've talked too much. You go. I'm muting myself. I refuse to speak. Go.
No, I just think getting those younger people involved and just running for office and being in elections, it's all going to fall on us. Basically, really showing them that it's being elected official is just not fun and games. It's hard work. It's dedication. A lot of people think, when they look at politics, they think it's, oh, y'all not doing anything. Y'all just sitting in office and really not doing nothing. I think by mentoring, bringing back mentorship back into the schools and having these elected officials go into the schools and really just have that one-on-one time with people in the community and just sit there and talk to them about their position, about who they are, why they ran, why they became who they are today. That is a feeling for a person that is 18, 20, 19, that's looking, saying, I never thought about getting into politics, but now I think about getting into politics. I'm going to be honest with you. I wish I had that in my life, because I never, until this Trump election, I'm going to be honest, I never thought about politics. That was not in my head. But now I find myself up watching CNN, NBC, watching all these politics shows. I'm like, man, I wish I could have known these things then. So it all goes back to bringing back that mentorship and bringing that education back to our younger crowd and the younger people, just to educate them.
I'll jump in, and Dr. Harder, this would be a nod to you. In college, I had a phenomenal professor by the name of Dr. Maceo Daly. And he pushed and challenged us. He was a professor of African American Studies, and on about 50 million boards. Some of them I think he made up. So, but he didn't allow us, meaning the Black students, to not care. We had a Black student coalition. We had a Black caucus. We had a Black student council. We had, but to your point, Ken, it was the mentorship. And for me, I had him so we understood all of these things. If you wanted to have an office, you had to understand what a platform was. And you just couldn't say this is what you're going to do, because obviously he had the supreme vote of removing you from office if you didn't fulfill the things that you said you were going to do, because he made us understand it was important to do the things that you say you're going to do for the people that you're doing them for. So I say, for me, to your point, the mentorship is imperative, and to understand too that, hey, that these are the things that you can get them involved in. or I think that we need to create opportunities, which is what Dr. Daly did for us. Create these opportunities for these kids to be able to do things and to be involved.
I could not agree more. And so here's some, we'll take, because I can't add to what you all said, it's exactly right? The exposure, the mentorship, things like that. So taking it from theory to practice, there's a million different things that we can do. So I'm very macro centered in my social work teaching. So I do community organizing, policy, research, stats, stuff like that. So I'm about making the problems are systemic, and thus the solutions have to be systemic. And so you have to go up and fix whatever that is at wherever it's broken, so that it fixes it for everybody who's oppressed underneath of it. So we talk about that, and their assignments are tethered to that. And I bring guest speakers. I bring the mayor. I'm cool with Mayor Colvin, who's the mayor of Fayetteville. I know all the city council persons and all the county commissioners. And so especially now, I know a bunch of electeds in the state house and the state senate, and I either bring them to class or I Zoom them into class so that they can touch these people. Because you can't touch Barack. You're so busy voting. I mean, I love Barack. I'm not hating, but you can't touch him. You can't touch Biden. As 2 weeks ago, I was as close as any regular person could get to Kamala Harris. I was like 10 feet and 3 Secret Service agents away at an event that I was invited to. But that is as close as you're going to get, right? But the closer, what we like to tell people is the closer your name is to the bottom of the ballot, the closer you are to the voter, right? So you're so busy up here on the Biden, and be on the Biden, please, right? Be on the Biden. I don't have to, I'm not representing SG Rose, so I can say whatever I want about who you should be voting for. Vote for the Biden, right? But the further down you get to that ballot, the closer they are to your actual community. So they have events, go to them. Bring them in if it's your classroom. Greeks do stuff all the time. I know the BLI brothers take people on Black college tours all the time. Let's also make it normalized taking them to the State House. Let's take them to the governor's mansion. Let's take them to these places. And you can sit in the gallery. You guys, if you go to the Capitol, the US Capitol or the state Capitol, there is a gallery area where just anybody can sit and watch the proceedings of the House and the Senate at the state level, as well as the federal level. You can go to your city council meetings and your county commission meetings as well. Let's normalize adding that into the things that we do to bring kids around, so that they know that when they're age appropriate, because some offices you can't be 18.
This always happens right when she's dropping some really good science on us, But I do want to continue to talk about. I'm sorry. I do want to continue. Yeah, you did. And it always happens right when you dropping that good knowledge on us.
Yeah,
but I do want to talk about. I still want to talk about, again, getting into what the opportunities for the youth are. We often try to impress upon them, or better yet, how can we impress upon them just how important what their role is in changing the impact of what it is that they're actually going to be learning. We talked about it a little bit earlier in this conversation, but how can we impress upon our youth how voting impacts or influences exactly what they actually will learn in school?
Well, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Make them do. I don't know where I left off before. I'm so sorry, y'all. I really apologize. You're all right. Make them do it. Make them all write letters and send them to their elected official about some issue, right? Take them to that person's office, either their state or federal elected or their local elected's office, and let them talk to the elected official and tell them this is what we want. Let them track a bill that's going through the state house or whatever, and see how it's influenced. Take them to a rally. For some group like Red for Ed, the teachers are always, on this. We have it in North Carolina. I don't know if it's national or not. Brother Boston Hill would know this as an educator himself, but the Red for Ed movement is the teachers who are out advocating for better teacher pay and things like that. Take them to it. Let them hear the people. Let them talk to the people. Let them be a part of the process, and then let them track how these things go. And you'd be surprised just how much they could get out of that process. Let me say that, stop talking before I freeze it.
No, I totally agree. Let them be a part of the process. That's That's the basic. That's the basic answer. Let them be a part of the process. If you're a part of the process, then you know what the outcome, or if it's what the outcome will be, whether it be not the outcome you want, but there will be an outcome. And I think it's just letting them see the process, letting them understand the process, and letting them adapt to the process is the best way to mobilize these people, mobilize teens and younger adults rather, how to get out and vote and be in the process of voting to elect these officials.
Right. And I was gonna say, steal Whitney's line. You know what I'm saying? Teach them well, let them lead the way. You know what I mean? And I think once they understand how their now affects their future, how their now affects their future, how what happens now, because we know in cycles, things are 3-4 years away from what happens right now. And, helping them understand that and to see that by doing exactly what Dr. Hardy said, taking them to these different events and thinking, saying, hey, this right here, what they're doing now, this is how it affect you down the road.
And Dr. Hardy.
I actually have
Ken.
I actually have a undergrad that actually started school this semester, and he's an actual junior, and he's actually now the president of the junior class. So as Dr. Hardy just put in the chat, that he ran for student government because he wants to take initiative to be in that process. And so I'm going to award him for taking that initiative of stepping out, and now he's the junior class president at his college now.
And so, but now all that is well and good as far as running for student government in your local high school or even in your college. But how do we get students to take part in their local school board elections? Because I think in some, depending on the state, depending on the city, some school boards require a high school student or two to sit on those boards. So how do we get them to take part in that aspect of it? Because that in a lot of places, that's where these things begin. Like the whole election cycle begins at the school board level, and then they move up in cycles until they get to the county legislature and so forth.
I would say part of it would be, in my opinion, is to challenge that. I'm sure we all can remember things about high school that we weren't particularly fond of, that we didn't particularly like, that at the time we didn't know, there was no way or anything we could do to do anything about it. And, I think the part of it is to challenge them that this is your chance to change some of those things or to have a say, to, challenge them to say, hey, these are the things that are available. I think that, in a sense of pushing them to and challenging them to do these things and participate in these things and say, here is, because we know at least a lot of the young folks that I hear say that, we said it when we were kids, adults don't listen to us. They don't ever listen to what we got to say. They tell us to go ahead on and go get somewhere and sit down. But this is your chance. I'm giving you a seat at the table, or there, right there. That chair is open, and that chair is reserved for you to sit at that table, and you can talk at that table. That table, you can say something. And so challenging them, in those ways to say, hey, showing them that these are where these seats are open for you to sit at that table, at the adult table, and be able to say those things. So challenging them to and pointing out the seats at the table they could sit and be able to say something and to be heard.
Anyone else want to jump in there?
I threw a thing in the chat that basically says, there are in most areas, the school board, the city council, and or the county commission, you're allowed to make public statements. You usually get like 2 minutes in there. If your statement is something they don't want to hear, they are very abrupt about that 2 minutes. But YouTube is replete with videos of young people who went in and gave their school board representatives the what for. And so showing them that their voices can matter and that they can resonate. I mean, the Parkland, Florida teens who survived that horrific mass shooting have been an excellent example of them saying, we're sick of the adults in the room not doing anything about this. Our lives really do matter. And so Greta Van Thunberg, who is the climate change activist, got into a whole pissing match with Trump and won around the issue of climate change, right? And she's just a kid. You've got so many young people as wonderful examples whose voices have mattered. And they've made an amazing amount of change. And so exposing them to those examples also, I think, helps encourage them to do this work as well.
Ken?
Just piggybacking off of Dr. I just believe the same thing, just exposing individuals to this, to those situations. I look back at when I was in high school, when I was a young adult. I didn't get the opportunity, and then also as well, my parents. So it ties into with your parents as well. The lack of education with the parents. So sometimes we might have to go into just educating the parents because we follow our parents' pattern. So we might have to go back and look at the parent and say, hey, let's dive in and mentor that parent as well as we mentor the child, as we mentor the young adult. Because sometimes we only do what we see what our parents do. So it ties into that as well.
Okay, so one other area I want to get into, and I addressed this question in one of our previous town hall discussions, but I want to bring it here as well, because I think it's also very important that we talk about this. And that's, we saw how in the last election cycle, especially, that how deep rifts within families and communities have been developed. So how can we have discourse when it comes to political discussions? Like, how can we disagree with each other without being disagreeable?
Okay. So, okay. Oh my God. Okay.
I figured we kind of wrap up on a high note.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, again, as I said before, I have a different take on things, because and here's my thing about it, is that disagreements is what brings about change. Thought provocation is what brings about change. Why brings about change. And so to an extent, the discourse is needed to have the conversation, because if we all think alike, then things won't change, or we'll try to make things great again. So I think that the discourse is needed to an extent. You know what I mean? I think that it's necessary to a point. And the point is when that we can no longer communicate. The point is when we're no longer hearing or listening to each other, we're just shouting how we feel. Because I know that, at least I can speak for myself, that I've gotten to disagreements or arguments with folks. Then I go back and chew on what was said by them. And then, you know what? You was right. I can see what they're saying. Okay, now I understand. But if the challenge me or challenge my thought process never happened, then I'm right and you're wrong. So I think it's necessity. And I think that it's to a point. But when we get to the point that we're no longer hearing or listening to each other is when it's gotten out of hand.
I think that you're right. And, sometimes they say, oh, if you want to keep friends, you can't talk about race, religion, and politics. Every issue that is problematic on this globe has always been as a result of some combination of race, religion, and politics. So we can't not have these conversations, right? But sometimes those conversations really do need to happen at an individual level. So on election day in 2020, two of my friends, fellow Black women scholars, came down to work the polls for me. They were at one particular site. I was getting them set up for the day. And there was a woman there who was for my opposition, my opponent. And she said, oh, I heard that you want to, since you're here, I heard that you want to raise my taxes. Do you want to raise my taxes? I said, oh my God, are you a billionaire? And she goes, absolutely not. I said, then no. And so then we had to have the whole conversation around, what I'm really talking about taxes. And so then she says, well, I heard you want to expand Medicaid, but I want to know this, who's paying for it? And I said, do you not know that you pay into Medicaid with every paycheck you get? And so it just became an education thing, because what I understand more now than ever is that on the right side of the aisle, right meaning conservative, not correct, they're so monolithic, generally speaking, in their political ideology that they only have to craft one narrative, and it's never fact, it's usually fear. And those sound bites are enough to get their people motivated to go to the polls. But when they're outside of that echo chamber and they actually have a conversation with someone who's willing to break it down, once again, I go into educator mode, explaining how this works to them. By the time we were done talking to her, honey, you could tell she had lamented her earlier vote. And so at the end of the day, it comes down to the fact that I think the average person just doesn't understand. And then we have to be willing on both sides of the aisle to realize that for some people just ignorant, and I'm not getting ready to have a conversation with somebody who's just ignorant, but for some people, they just genuinely don't know. And so if you can explain it to them in ways that make sense and hear that they also have a concern. A lot of these, I'm not talking about no QAnon nonsense. I'm talking about like actual people who vote on the right because they hear stuff that makes them afraid that they're going to lose their money or their home or their gun. I live in North Carolina, but anyway, so they're afraid of those things, and their fears are no less valid than anybody else's. But the talking points that have been given to them are typically less valid because they're not factual. And so, and this speaks to a thing, and I promise I'm gonna wrap it on this. Sometimes we have to be willing to talk to the people on our own side of the tent that your thing is not working. Because if you talk to a lot of Democrats across the country from the 2020 election who lost, and that was the majority of us, the one thing that we all point to that was the death knell for our campaigns as the October surprise was hashtag defund the police. Both of my parents are law enforcement officers. There is no way that I was talking about closing down police departments. Some of the more radical set really were talking about that, but the average person knew what they were saying. But that snippet, that soundbite was all the conservatives needed to run a campaign against all of us that we could never come back from because it was too close to election day. So the very people who could have done the work that the defund people wanted done were the ones most hampered by the defund message, because a snappy hashtag is not a political movement. It's not a political platform, and it wound up doing more harm than good. So we have to have those conversations on both sides of the aisle so that we know how to craft messages that are not getting taken out of context and used against the candidates that can help them.
I'm gonna come back to something you said, but go ahead, Ken.
You're muted, Ken.
Oh, I think with me, it basically comes down with even I look at my family and I look at talking to my family and talking to my coworkers. It comes down to the style of communication. When you're talking about politics, you have to sometimes know your audience and know who you're speaking to. Because you can have a person that is very aggressive, or you can have a person that's very passionate, or you can have a person that's, very sensitive. So you have to sometimes know your audience when you are relaying information, especially that's pertaining something to you. So I had to learn that, especially with my coworkers, because it was a time where we were going to the office. I mean, even on Zoom or Teams, and we would just have this debate, and it would be language that would go over in debate because people were so sensitive about who they wanted to vote for, their politics views. So you really have to know who your audience is and how you communicate with them. And I agree with Dr. and Rob on every last level. I also believe that it's about communication style as well.
And the only thing that I was going to add to what Dr. Hardy said, and caveat from what Ken is saying, that we have to start it in our own communities, meaning Black and brown people. We have to understand each other before we're able to come together and unite for something. I think the conversations need to be had. To your point, Ken, understanding the audience that you're speaking to, and then from breaking it down so that we understand, so that we wholly can, go and vote for a candidate like Dr. Hardy.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for participating in this discussion. And before we do break out, take a moment and give us your final thought on just the importance of voter education, voter mobilization, and really getting back to what Senator Parker labeled as the voting process as opposed versus an event.
I think my takeaway is we have not reached the mountaintop. We cannot take voting for granted. We have not had the right to vote in this country as Black folk for a millennia, right? We cannot take it for granted. And so what's critically important to remember is that your lack of participation in the process does not absolve you from the consequences of those who did. So just because you didn't vote for that judge doesn't mean that you won't be held to some unfair cash bail system. Just because you didn't vote for that school board person doesn't mean your kid is going to get a curriculum that isn't whitewashed, right? So you're still going to be subject to the decisions made by the people who did vote for those folks to be in office. And so even if it feels almost futile, you still have a responsibility and a right to cast your ballot and make your voice heard so that there is even just the slightest chance that we can move the needle forward in this country.
And I will say my major takeaway is that it matters. It matters regardless of the level. We think, and I can speak for my own self, school board, I ain't got no kids in school. My kids are grown. But my friend who I speak to on a regular basis, I can help affect what matters to his kids. And so the takeaway is that regardless of where it is, the big stuff is going to come, it's going to happen, but the work is done at the lowest level. So going back to what Senator Parker said, engage, participate, mobilize those who are around you, and to support those candidates at that lower level. And we don't get into a situation where Dr. Hardy just left off 4 people would have mattered. I can name 4 people I know that didn't vote that probably would have made that difference. So understanding that, saying, hey, the education that it does. So it starts at the lower level and being able to, encourage those to participate in those so that we're not even talking about those 4 votes anymore because everyone's engaged, they're participating, they're mobilizing so that my brother-in-law's from North Carolina, so I knew all of those names that you spoke about, that you don't have things like that happening because from what I know of those women, they're all great women and would have done great things for the state of North Carolina. And it wouldn't have been, and this would have never been something that would have happened if we get involved at the lower levels and do that. So my takeaway is that no matter how minutiae or how small the election is, get involved, participate, and make the difference because the difference there makes a difference up
top. My basic thing will be just basically voter processing is going to bring healthy outcomes. So we want healthy outcomes, we want change, then get out and let your voice be heard. Let your hold your local level officials accountable for this democracy. That's my takeaway. It brings healthy outcomes. No matter what the outcome may be, it's still a healthy outcome because you got out there and you participated in the process.
So it seems that, and we'll end here, but it seems that the voting process is the one thing or one of the things that links all of us together. Because as Robert, as you said, that you may not think that because it doesn't impact you, it's still going to impact somebody you know. And therefore, you still want to become involved in the process that's taking place. So again, the big takeaway here is get involved in the process. We need everybody to be involved. If things don't go your way, you know what? Then you get involved even deeper. So that until it does go your way, but we can't use that as an excuse for things not happening and for not being part of this entire process. So again, we want to thank Ken Peoples, Robert Johnson, Dr. Kimberly Hardy, and of course, State Senator Kevin Parker for being here and taking part in this latest installment of the Cast Your Vote series. Why is voter registration so important to our democracy? For all of you out there listening and tuning in, thank you for tuning in and taking part in this as well. And we hope that you join us for our very next installment when we actually make it more public for all of you to be here. Until then, take care of each other, and we'll see you on the other side. Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.